You know where that is?
I
It's
don't.
like a consulting firm that helps with like marketing and campaign strategy
And it was
stuff.
great.
Yeah, it's been
We'll
good.
get started
It's
in
a
about
good
4 or 5
opportunity.
minutes. But if you
How
have a
are you?
pizza already, it's just right behind this wall.
I'm
Go
muted
grab
still,
some
so we're good.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. What's going on?
Thanks for being here. Yeah. How's So when is your Truman interview? Is it this Friday? Or no?
Well, they don't decide if we get interviews until later, but I just submitted it. It was due first thing this morning, so I got about 2 hours of sleep last night. Stayed up and printed it out. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Maddie Hare. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse through civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is titled Utah and Climate Innovation and is presented as part of the Wilkes Center Speaker Series. We want to thank Wilkes Center for Climate and Policy at the Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute for their partnership on this event. We are excited to be joined by some great panelists. Kim Shelley's career has focused on Utah's environmental priorities. As the executive director of the Department of Environmental Quality, she leads with a vision of improving health and quality of life of Utah residents through the administration of state and federal laws that protect Utah's air, land, and water. An engineer by training, Shelley has held various leadership roles with the DEQ, most recently as the department's deputy director. In addition to her private sector experience, Shelley has worked in a private industry as a research and development engineer. Senator Escamilla was first elected in 2008, becoming the first Latina elected to the Utah State Senate, and the first Latina elected to the Utah State Legislature. Senator Escamilla serves as the Senate Minority Leader. In 2005, she was appointed by the Governor John Huntsman as the first director of the State Office of Ethnic Affairs. In 2020, Senator Escamilla took on the role of Chief of Operations Officer at MeCare Network, a healthcare startup based in Utah that focuses on innovative care and management solutions. More recently, she co-founded Escatic Solutions, which enhances customer experience, CX, through technology and artificial intelligence. Gabby Tellez is a managing director at the Utah Innovation Lab. Prior to her appointment, Tellez worked as an analyst for the Intermountain's Health Corporate Venture Capital Fund. She has also worked at Levitt Partners as a health policy associate, where she helped convene various stakeholders that drive innovative policy. She is passionate about creating and maintaining cultures of innovation and has a passion for interdisciplinary collaboration. Today's conversation will be moderated by Dr. Jennifer Robinson, Chief of Staff at the Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute, where she oversees the Institute's communications, human resources, and finances. She also directs the Institute's economics and policy team. In this role, she oversees research projects with the goal of providing insightful information to community leaders. Notable projects include the widely praised annual Utah Informed Booklet, the Economic Report to the Governor, and the recent Diversity in the Utah Data Book. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
Hey, good afternoon. As you noticed, we have a missing person, and Senator Escamilla is just finishing up a call with the committee, and she'll join us shortly. As soon as she does, we'll get to her questions. It's a beautiful day to be talking about climate and energy, and I'm so appreciative to have both Gabby and Kim joining us. We're going to talk a lot about innovation in our state, and there's no better place to start than with Gabby. And Gabby, we're going to ask you to begin by telling us a little bit about the Utah Innovation Lab that was recently established.
Yeah, absolutely. So this last legislative session, there was a $15 million venture capital fund approved that's called the Utah Innovation Fund. And it specifically has the responsibility to help commercialize technologies being advanced, developed, or discovered in the state of Utah. And so really the need for that is in Utah, we have a ton of software investors. So if you're a software company, it's not too hard to get capital, but the challenge that exists with these deeply technical innovations, things like energy and natural resources, aerospace and defense, life science, biotech, all those areas, there's this gap in funding that they can't currently fill in the state of Utah. And so what happens is our companies that start in those areas a lot of times end up getting outside capital from your San Francisco, Boston, New York hubs, and then investors will require their companies to move. So we lose a lot of that talent and that economic development that can come from those companies staying and being supported in the state of Utah. And so this fund was created to specifically help those types of companies. And it's interesting because actually our first deal that we did is a company called Eden Tech, and it's a company out of Utah Tech that was a student really passionate about desalination and how to increase the capability of getting clean water to these desert areas. And he created this reverse osmosis centrifuge with a couple of his professors at Utah Tech that can actually increase the efficiency of desalination plants by 40%. So those are the types of things that we're seeing across the state, in universities, at corporations, with different partnerships. And that's specifically what we were created to help fund, to keep those companies here and support them throughout their growth.
I love the story of a student at Utah Valley,
Right?
or Utah Tech?
Utah Tech in St. George.
Utah Tech coming up with some innovative, creative way to help improve our lives.
Yeah.
Any other things happening with the U or Utah Valley or with USU that you can share with us?
Absolutely. So we've seen some really interesting things. I don't know if any of you know, given this panel, there's probably some people that do. We've been talking a lot with Masood, and the center here specifically for energy, and some of the work that he's done on batteries. And he has a technology that's actually in use at the University of Utah Hospital. And so it's Masood, who's a professor, if you're not familiar, and a couple of PhD students and things like that have developed a number of different technologies, but specifically the one that we're seeing the most market interest in right now, that helps people. It's an app, so people will go on their phone and it's linked to EV chargers, and they can put how long they're going to be at the charger. And then what it does is it helps to not overburden the grid. So if I'm sitting there and I need to leave in an hour, then it will distribute the energy appropriately. But if I can plug my car in and be gone for 10, 15 hours, it will distribute it so that it doesn't overburden the grid. So we're seeing lots of really cool things at a lot of the different schools.
Oh, that's great. Let's keep on the school theme. You're in a room at the
Yep.
Hinckley Institute full of students. How could students be involved with all the great things that you're doing at the Innovation Lab?
Yeah, thank you for asking. We actually have a couple of things. We have an internship available, so if there's any students that are interested in kind of this commercialization, entrepreneur, startup, venture capital piece of energy and climate tech and all of that, we have an internship available. We're currently recruiting for our January start date and then also our summer internship. So if there's anybody here that's interested in those, please come talk to me after and reach out and we can get you connected. We also have associated with our group the Utah Policy Innovation Lab. That focuses more on the policy aspect, and it's basically looking through the lens of, as we see all these different innovations come out and come to be, sometimes the barrier in these deeply technical fields is from a policy perspective. So the innovation is there, we're there from a technical capability, but the policies are maybe historic and haven't been updated to meet the changing dynamic of the innovation. So we also have a policy innovation lab that we're hiring interns for that can help more on the policy side. So we have those two opportunities available for students right now.
That's great. I bet at the end you're going to have a few students come up and visit with you.
Hopefully so. I would love that.
That would be great. Kim, let's stay on this topic of innovation. You said to me last week that Utah is the sleeper innovator. Tell us what you mean by that.
So it is not disparaging at all. This is something that the Utahns and the public at large really don't have an understanding of. So Utah is 1% of the population, but yet we have an abundance of natural resources and also abundance of challenges that are driving some of the innovations that Gabby referred to. But we do it in a way that is a little bit different than the rest of the nation. We do it collaboratively, and those innovations are driving some really fantastic ideas here in the state where we're looked at as leaders, but part of the Utah way, if you will, is that we don't always advertise. So we're not out there trying to toot our own horn, but we have all of these fantastic, from the university student level, from the research level, through the venture capital piece, through state agencies, our legislators who are focused on solving problems. And that's what I mean by sleeper, that we have everyone rowing in the same direction. And people have, I guess, underestimated the state of Utah in the past, but I think our time is coming to shine.
That's great. One of the policies that I think the state's been very innovative on is the Beehive Emission Reduction Program. Tell everybody what that is.
Yeah, so we are really excited about this program here in the state of Utah. So this is part of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program that was funded through the IRA bill in 2022. That bill came to states with a call to develop climate pollution plan. So in Utah, we've rebranded it as the Beehive Reduction Plan because we are taking ownership of this plan, Utah Solutions for some of Utah's climate challenges. Part of the federal dollars that are coming in are $4.6 billion with a B, available to states on a competitive and others on a competitive basis. So this is a game changer for accelerating emission reductions and climate solutions across the U.S. So Utah, I'm proud to say, is part of this. Not every state chose to take advantage of this, but Utah did, which again shows our forward thinking in this space. Part of this is it's a two-phase approach. We have a planning phase that we're currently in, and part of this we are gathering input from everyone. You don't just have to be a climate scientist. We want everyone's perspective at the table. And we're pleased that we've had that so far. We've got a very short time frame, less than 2 years to develop this plan. And part of this plan is an emission inventory as well as actionable steps that we can take to reduce greenhouse gases in the state. And then the second phase is the implementation phase. So we're looking for transformational projects to be included in this plan that will then be eligible to compete for the $4.6 billion that'll be made available nationwide. Because Utah is 1% of the population, our best guess is that we'll be eligible for $460 million for the state. So this is truly a historic time to be in the climate space, and we're really excited about everyone who's come to the table so far.
Yeah. Senator Escamilla, why do you think Utah is such an innovator?
Thank you, sorry. I was in a meeting that was a little bit disturbing, so it took me a minute, I apologize. I want to also recognize my colleague, Senator Bluen from the Senate Democrat caucus as well. And I think one of the reasons I think Utah is, there's a lot of innovation, and I agree with some of this idea of, we may not sometimes advertise too much of the work that's happening, but part of it is we have great higher education institutions, University of Utah being one of them, that is allowing for students and research to take place. We also are in a pretty unique space. I mean, our own tomography, just where we are located, is giving us some challenges that are unique to Utah. So either we get our act together and we fix it, because if not, then we're all dying, literally, unfortunately. Some of us that had developed asthma, some of us that live on the west side of Salt Lake City, we have to eat it every day. I have a 7-year-old that I just came from a doctor visit because of her asthma. So the reality is, may not be a big issue for some. For others, that is disproportionately impacting through social determinants of health is a reality. And so even with all this innovation, unfortunately, we have a lot of people that are being directly impacted. What's unique about Utah, and whether it's talking about innovation, the word climate, I think sometimes is we get stuck in words. And I think in Utah, in order to move to the next level, we're going to have to think outside the box so we don't get stuck on semantics. And, I know some words may mean a lot for people, but what we need is actions. So talking about emission reductions plan, 2 years ago, I passed Bill SB 136. And we started with this idea of, it came from the advocacy community, SB 136. And we, it's being a more proactive, more focus on incentives versus the carrot versus stick approach, and trying to model other states that have been effective, states that Utah can relate to, so clearly not California. But we end up focusing on the Texas emission reduction program. So we, our Division of Air Quality did a really big research process, and those recommendations just came out. They will be presented tomorrow at the interim committee on Wednesday. And I'll be running some legislation from those recommendations. One of the pieces that we certainly can do, and obviously the federal funds coming our way, watch how much we love the federal government when there's money involved, just a side note. Which is great. We're making it Utah. I love the word beehive, and we've been part of those conversations with our Division of Air Quality. But we need to do more in even understanding what some of these emission emitters are. We don't know. I mean, we know how many cars are out there, right? When you think vehicles, whether it's like a semi or a car, because they have to register. What about everything else that's emitting tons of emissions and PM 2.5 and ozone that we not even aware exist? So one of the things that this bill that I'm hoping to work with, and not that all my colleagues are excited about, is this idea of a registry. So not only registry to actually know what we have, but if we want to be creative and bring a carrot approach to this and incentivize to get cleaner, anything, we need to know how to communicate with these individuals that are needing. I mean, these vehicles are being utilized mostly for work. I mean, it's not like for fun. So how do we let them know that there is incentives, that there's funding, potentially available so they can get cleaner, cleaner equipment. For the purpose of our conversation, it's mostly equipment. But I mean, you think about how some of this equipment pollutes more than a trip to Disneyland, literally for 1 hour of using some of this equipment. This is it. I mean, guys, look at our construction in our city. How is that not polluting? I mean, it's like the most smallest things that we don't think about. It's like, oh, it's growth. Like the city's growing. Yeah, it's also polluting the rest of the air we're breathing. So what's exciting about this innovation, because innovation matters, is how are we using technology? How are we also using the funding? Because we need to be innovators on the way we even utilize these funds that are coming our way, because it's not going to look the same as California for sure. And please, I mean, and I apologize, I always get stuck with people. It's like, well, that's the correct thing, or again, it's semantics. What you want is results. So one of the things I encourage people is like, can we just focus on the result and how we call it as we're navigating the whole process? We may be in different places on that, but if we can get to that outcome and the results, which is something I think the Division of Air Quality has, because historically they've been one of those departments or divisions that get a lot of attention, have mastered really well with a lot of years of experience. I'm hoping to see the energy one, the Office of Energy, getting there, because I know they've been through a lot in the last 8 years, but I'm excited for that. So that was a long answer to your question, sorry.
Well, I really appreciate that. Maybe you could give us some insight. We have a lot of students in the room, as you know. Give us some insight into how Republicans and Democrats both approach innovation around climate right now.
So I think one is, that's such a hard question. No, it's not hard to explain. I'm trying to find the correct word so I don't get in trouble. But the reality is there are different perspectives. And I think if we had a different legislature, it may look very different. But I think what you can see from effective legislators is we need to move from that and focus in incrementalism. So for all my political science majors and public policy, it's about 100% incrementalism. And it's very frustrating. I get it. Because at the end, you still are seeing results. I mean, Intermountain Health just came out with their number of visits during emergency room for women and people with heart conditions in the middle of air quality, right? And that correlation is real. You're thinking, hey, take action. I mean, people end up in the emergency room. Why are we waiting? It takes time. So I would say incrementalism is one way where the legislature has been able to move the needle. And it's going to take years to see it, but it has happened. As someone that's been there for 15 years, I've seen it move. And so, I've run some of that legislation from how you measure, because part of it is we didn't have, aside from what the federal government and whether we're non-attainment versus an attainment area, we didn't have necessarily a lot of data in specific areas. So even putting and placing the ways of collecting data, for example, at the inland port, the airport, all the west side, northwest quadrant parts of the state, of the city in this case, it just took legislation to get us there. So even before we can have some of these conversations. The other one is this idea of whether you eliminate completely or not. I think in the incremental conversations, we are talking about diversifying our energy, diversifying everything. So it's not about eliminating, but diversifying. Those are the words that have made it so we can actually move the needle. Again, if we're coming with, California did this, that's probably automatically dead on arrival for a piece of legislation, just being very blunt. But if we bring Texas, for example, where Utah can relate to Texas, and that's what we did with this piece, it's like, okay, Texas makes more sense. We can relate to them. Let's focus on good things, because Texas has had great results. So I've traveled with a passport in Texas, but apparently they are doing some good stuff in emission reduction. So, in that sense, can we then utilize and find best practices from more conservative red states in order to bring those forward in the legislature and be more effective? If I'm trying to bring what California or Oregon or Washington is doing, most likely I'm not gonna see that success I want. So it's the way you frame it, is the way you're having the conversation. It's not about eliminating something, it's how we diversify our ability to find solutions in a way to get the outcomes we need.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Kim, I'm going to jump back to you. legislative session's about 2 months away. The governor will release his budget next month. Can you give us a preview of what his priorities are related to your office?
Tricky question, because we certainly put in our request. Every single agency within the executive branch puts their requests in, and then we don't have a lot of insight on that until the budget is released. But I can tell you what is a priority for the department is air quality, and I appreciate Senator Escamilla highlighting the really good work of the Division of Air Quality. They are a team of really great scientists and engineers that are doing good work behind the scenes on behalf of Utahns. One thing that we are prioritizing, of course, this is also something that Senator Escamilla mentioned, incentives for polluting equipment. Our leaf blowers that are in heavy use this time of year and our trimmers pollute as much as driving a car from Ogden to Disneyland, as she mentioned. And that is a real issue because not only at the local level for the operator of that equipment, but also as it's dispersed and those VOCs are put into the airshed. So we are looking for ways to incentivize folks to move away from that. We also have a significant challenge in front of us with ozone, and VOCs are a precursor to the formation of ozone. And so we need additional staff to help us do the modeling and the additional work that comes along with that. So we are heavily focused on air quality this session, but also water quality as well. And in drinking water, we have had some challenges with related to climate, increasing temperatures, demand for water. We're looking for some relief for some of our smaller communities when they do run out of water related to drought. So we're hopeful that it'll make into the governor's budget, and sounds like sounds like we can count maybe Senator Escamilla's support on the air quality piece on the incentives, because it sounds like we're of a like mind.
That's great. Gabby, I'm going to keep working my way down the panel and come back to you right now. I want to talk a little bit about energy innovation in our state. I think a lot about Carbon and Emery counties in my work. Those are our coal communities. It's where coal is mined mostly. We have 2 power plants that are located in Emery County that are slated to close in the next decade or so. Tell me what you know about energy innovation. What's the future of energy in our state?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and we look at a number of different sectors. So it's interesting having that perspective. But one thing that we've seen with energy, and even the types of companies that we've seen come across our desk as potential investments, are really spanning the entire spectrum of what we're looking at. It's not just that there's one source that we see as the future of energy in Utah. It's really an all of the above approach is what I've heard in a lot of those different meetings. And so we're uniquely positioned in Utah, actually, in a lot of these different areas because of the natural resources that we have within the state, lithium, magnesium, all of those types of things that are critical to these certain types of renewable energies going forward. And even we're one of the nation's largest producers of uranium. So when you think about nuclear, we're well positioned in a lot of these different areas. You talk about, Carbon and Emery County. And one of the things that we've seen super interesting recently is that there's been an influx of people trying to innovate specifically surrounding that type of energy. And how do we revitalize these communities that really have been given a death sentence? How do we revitalize them through innovation, through thinking, how can we repurpose the spaces, the people, the knowledge to continue to contribute to the energy sector, but not have to eliminate their livelihood that really has been established there. The other thing that's interesting is geographically, we're well positioned, and that geography unfortunately does help to contribute to some of the air quality issues. At the same time, positions us well in some energy sources. So as you think about solar farms, right? We have an entire southern part of the state that's sunnier throughout the year. We see a lot of solar farms down there. We look at places like Spanish Fork Canyon and the other canyons. Just the nature of the geography of those canyons allows for wind farms. So we're well positioned to innovate in a lot of different areas. And one of the things that I've loved is that the conversation it is political in a lot of ways, no doubt about that, due to the nature of what we're talking about. At the same time, what we've had here is the state puts a heavy emphasis on looking at ROI on these different opportunities and what they can do. So as opposed to just saying, hey, coal's bad, we shouldn't be doing it, we're looking at, okay, what are the issues? You know, where are those issues? How can we innovate surrounding those issues? And it's really an approach that's long-term. It's not realistic for somebody to say out, and people do it. People say, you know, we're gonna have no whatever by 2030. Well, in order to actually get to a place that's sustainable over time, where people can still use the energy that they need in their homes, in their lives, it requires this phased approach that's going to require the conversion to natural gas and some of these renewable types of energy, but also as innovation happens, it can change what that phased approach looks like, because what's possible is different.
Senator Escamilla, she said two really important things. She's talked about diversification of our energy sources and a phased approach. How does that resonate with you and others on the Hill?
That's just the only way we're going to do it. And I mean, you think about the grid, and I mean, even if we all moved to solar tomorrow, it would just not work. I mean, at the end of the day, we don't have the infrastructure. This is an infrastructure conversation, and it's about investment. And this is where the state certainly plays a role, but it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So as we're, we require private-public partnerships. It's going to require thinking outside the box. It's about communities that are feeling this idea of, not having any future. And so how do we inject hope in so many of these communities through innovation, by bringing good partners into that investment and that infrastructure process? But that infrastructure, so here's where politics, unfortunately, sometimes comes, and is this dynamic. For example, I mean, I made a joke, probably shouldn't laugh, but this idea of the tension between the federal government and state government. We should look more into those partnership pieces, and using sometimes this, terms or conversations to attack one another. And we, when I say me, collectively, I think we talk amongst leadership, both the majority and the minority, on how can we agree. We can agree to disagree on a lot of things, but if we agree to agree on some pieces, can we use those more and have more conversations coming together about it? We are part of that innovation team with Representative Moss, as he leads that part of USHE, in terms of, what policies do we need to be more, I would say progressive, maybe that's not the word they like, but more proactive in those solutions. How do we invest in our youth? I mean, by that, this new generations of innovators and all the technology that's out there, so they know that we have a government that wants to invest in them. And obviously those happen through our higher education institutions. And so higher education institutions are so critical as we continue to move in this diversifying our energy portfolio and how that looks like. How do we also work with our neighboring states? That's another very important piece. We have an inland port, and I know that's traumatic. It's in my district, so we've all gone through trauma with the inland port, but now that it's here, we need to figure out how we're gonna work with this inland ports. This spoken health approach, right? So this idea that we can, move some of this energy to become a great producer of all this diversity of energy. I think it's something that we can look forward. We have a lot of things in Utah that other states don't have. But we also need to be very responsible. For example, we think about the Great Salt Lake or Colorado River. How are our relationships with our neighboring states as we continue to, focus on some of this innovation? It's just we don't live anymore in this isolated ways of doing things. I mean, it's global. And you think about nearshoring now after COVID and some of the tensions we have with China and other countries around the world through this geopolitical reality that we live in. Well, is it Mexico now, right? So we just came from a trade mission with the governor in Mexico with the state of Nuevo León, which has the fastest crossing of anything you can imagine through their port of entries in Nuevo León with the state of Texas. Within 5 minutes, they can cross things. So like if that's where we want to move then with some of our own energy, because they have a huge need for energy. So that's an opportunity. Can the inland port be the one through train, if we electrified our train, which is how we want to go through the greenest inland port in the world, which is who we want to be, is that where we're going to go and invest? So it's thinking outside the box. It's really thinking globally. We can no longer even think regionally or nationally. We need to think globally, and how we, even in the very unfortunate situations that we are facing as a world, we still need to start finding solutions to be more diversifying those portfolios, but understanding that it will impact the entire world, not only us as a community.
Yeah, thank you. I don't feel like we can leave today without talking about the Great Salt Lake. It's one of those situations in our state where you see climate directly impacting the health of the lake and the health of the citizens of our state. Could you tell us a little bit, whoever wants to answer this first is great, but what has the state done in the last year to really improve that lake level? Of course, Mother Nature helped last year with an incredible snowpack, but what has the state been doing?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take the first crack at that. So I do think it's been an all-hands-on-deck approach to protecting the Great Salt Lake, not only with our the executive branch and the legislative branch, but also with our partners in higher ed, partners in the water community. Everyone is coming together because water is how most of us experience climate change firsthand. It's not necessarily through air quality, but it is through the water space. So there's been historic legislation that has been passed allowing for practices that haven't been able to occur in the past, such as agriculture optimization, and that gets to what Senator Escamilla mentioned as well on the incentive piece. There's also historic funding that comes along with that, and we are not mandating that folks and that are farmers and our producers, et cetera, transition to different ways of agriculture. We're saying, look, if you want to do that, here's some money to help you pipe your ditches so we're not losing water that would otherwise make it to the Great Salt Lake, or shoring up our aqueducts, things like that are protecting these water losses that have occurred over years and years and years. We're also metering. That's a huge change. You can't measure. It's not a priority. What you're not measuring is if we can measure these water systems, secondary water, agriculture systems, et cetera, we'll know where the water is going and how we can further address the problem. So for me, it's been a really transformational last couple of years on the waterfront, and I'm really encouraged about the things that we can do together going forward. And part of it that has been unique for me is that we've had different stakeholders at the table than we've had in the past. And that having all those different voices and perspectives are critical to solving some of these really, really tough challenges here in the state.
Yeah, sometimes I worry that there's an issue that's the issue for the session, and maybe the Great Salt Lake was the issue last session. Is it still the issue?
Yeah, so that was perfect, and thank you for that summary. I think I just want to be very brutally honest with everyone. Part of why we had this, there's the urgency because it was very obvious, and there's water needs and things, the fugitive dust that now is coming our way, which has a huge healthcare piece, the animals that were dying, just everything it was going downhill super fast. Not that we didn't know this for 20 years, so let's just be clear. So we've ignored this problem for decades, collectively. What happened, which was a very unique situation, I hate to say this, is post-COVID, we have a lot of federal funds. So now the money's not there, guys. So this is where it's gonna get nasty, because now let's see where people are putting their money where their mouth is. This is where it's gonna be hard. So I love this, because part of what created, it's interesting to say, a lot of it has to do with resources and funding, is that we were able to create this innovation. Some of this funding that we're talking about in the hundreds of millions of dollars went into funding real innovation that were coming from some of our universities and private companies here in Utah, local startups that were creating a lot of creative, innovative, I met some of them last week. Wow, how they're, using, 1/10 of the water they will use for, just amazing stuff. So now that we have it, we better be able to sustain that. And that's my biggest concern. So to answer your question, I think there's still going to be an interest because the impact was huge. I mean, we have now even the federal government intervening in some of these pieces. And by the way, the loss is gigantic. I mean, it's beyond just the Great Salt Lake. I mean, like it really will affect our economy, and it was already being an issue. But we disregarded that. I think all collectively we should be responsible. Obviously, as elected officials, we were talking about it. Sometimes it's hard to get to that the noise to that level when you're a super minority, and that's the excuse. Just makes it really hard. So it was nice to collectively be like, holy cow, we're in trouble. Let's do something. Yeah, we went all in. There were funding, there were resources. There's not going to be there anymore, guys. So that's one thing that I'm now kind of like talking about. When there's a lot of money, there's a lot of problems because distributing money is really hard. And when there's not money enough, that's a different type of problems because now we have to cut the budget. So please watch because what we had will no longer be there. You're going to see a pause in a way. So now what we need to do is how are we going to be creative enough and aggressive enough not to have them drop the ball, not because it's not the kind of like the flavor of the month per se, because I still think right now people recognize that either we fix this or it's going to be pretty bad. Now, I think our farmers, have been, and I co-chair the local food advisory council. In our statute, we are very, we're charged with making sure we have all the, necessities for our local growers and producers for food, obviously, to succeed. And part of it is this innovation and talking about how we help them. Sometimes the smaller ones that don't get access to some of this stuff. So I think the agencies, whether it is in the case of the Department of Environmental, issues, also you have food and agriculture and food. I mean, they are just Department of Economic Opportunity, all aggressively putting out there smaller grants for smaller businesses. And it's tough. I mean, getting some of these businesses to qualify even to apply, it requires a lot of effort, but it's also your taxpayers' money. So we have to be very responsible, transparent, and accountable for those funds. But my concern now is the resources, so not the will. We have and I'll say this, the governor and the legislature, leadership has been very aggressive in the Great Salt Lake. I mean, former Speaker Brad Wilson was one of his top priorities the last 3 years. Now he is no longer in the legislature, but his legacy, I think, in there, it's, with respect, I mean, he did a lot, and he was doing it by putting money on what he was talking about. Now, without funds, it's going to make it a little bit more of a challenge. So we required the public, students, people that understand some of this more from a scientific side, and just to keep the legislature so we are accountable for all of those things that we said we were going to do, because it will require a long-term commitment. And my concern is like the funds are not going to be there anymore.
Really important issue, not just for water, but for everything this coming session. It's a big challenge. Gabby, let's finish up with you, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. Tell us what you are seeing on either the energy or the water innovation front from the lab.
Yeah, and I think I touched on a couple of the key really interesting things that we're seeing. But one of the things too, and I think it goes to the dynamic that we just talked about with federal funding resources and state being dried up in some ways. We see the same thing in the venture capital community, where what has happened is in 2020, in 2021 and the beginning of 2022, there was an influx of capital into all these different areas from a venture capital perspective. And now we haven't seen, like you look at the IPO market, you look at mergers and acquisitions for the last year, it's been really lacking. And the couple of IPOs that have happened have been a solid signal to the rest of the market that it's not a good time to do that. Mm-hmm. So even from the market dynamics, we're seeing some things. And it's challenging because a lot of the innovation that we're talking about in this area requires significant capital. It's not your traditional software type things that can get a couple $1 million and then take off. They're really these, you talk about infrastructure, you talk about large machinery and these types of things. We're talking millions and millions of dollars that need to go into these types of innovations to get them to a point where they're able to successfully infiltrate in communities and have the effect that we want them to have. On the other side, one thing that we're seeing that's super interesting is when there's constrained resources, creativity can really spark up. And so we are seeing that in some areas, and of course there's some reality that these infrastructure needs, they need a specific amount of capital. And if it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. What we're seeing is a ton of software and I'll say like digital related solutions that are being applied on top of technologies that already exist. So there are a lot of people, and I've seen them, from student level, professors, entrepreneurs that have done it multiple times. They're getting really creative in how they're thinking about these problems and solutions in the midterm while that funding is less. So I will say, it's tough in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's super interesting because the creativity that we're seeing and the lean operations that people are running actually in the long term can lead to some really cool things. So I'm also happy for this kind of market reset.
Yeah. Well, and can I just add in terms of technology and innovation? I think one of the things that we're seeing is artificial intelligence is moving so fast that in this specific area, especially with the data that we have, because one of the things that even though it's not perfect, but we've tried is collecting data. So and that is actually public domain in a way, which is super nice when it comes to some of these pieces of water and energy. And there's accessibility to that data that artificial intelligence now can certainly solve a lot of these pieces and maybe trigger more efficiencies in the way we are using the few resources we have. So as someone that now, part of my business focus on artificial intelligence, I'm seeing them utilize on even carbon credit acquisitions. Insane, like crazy, amazing stuff happening through artificial intelligence, because now they're able to use smaller samples through this technology to figure out, carbon credit, resiliency and efficiency without having to go through the entire area. So it's shocking to see just how advanced it is. It just tells you how old I am. That is scary, but at the same time, there's so much hope behind all of that innovation that's happening.
I'm so glad you brought that up. What a great addition. Let's open it up to questions from the audience. We have about 15 minutes. Just raise your hand and we have somebody who will come with a mic. Oh, please don't be shy. Please.
Hi, Ross Chambliss with the Wilkes Center. Thanks again for doing this. Question is about the prospect of the Olympics being hosted here again in Salt Lake City, and I'm just wondering to what degree you think that might be a catalyst or an incentive for innovation in the climate space for Utah.
I'll just, again, start off, and I know these women will have a lot to add. We're really excited about it. We're really excited about the prospect of a climate positive games possibly coming to Salt Lake in the state. I know we saw in 2002 there were some significant investments in state in the public transportation space that we are reliant on today, and it allowed us to overcome some of the hurdles that were faced early on. So I'm really excited about the prospect, not only of the idea of hosting the games in and of themselves, but what the transformational impact it will have on Salt Lake City and in our state as a result. But yeah, I'd love to hear others' ideas.
Yeah, so I'm in the legislative committee that's kind of addressing that piece. And, it's all been extremely positive. And obviously, I believe it's almost like a guarantee it's coming, which is exciting. Utah continues to be this unique place where there's no inner fighting, which people are always suspicious, how come they all get along well? Which was not the case with the rest of the bidding cities. And for us, we say Salt Lake, but it's truly, the whole valley, because they're outside of Salt Lake City, some of these places. So one, infrastructure is always a win. We know it every time there's those type of events, tons of infrastructure comes our way. You know, I'm actually curious how we're going to have to go through semantics on the wording, because I think everybody agrees that they want this to be the perfect place, but we still are going to have to do some work in terms of our commitments to some of these pieces, because now the Olympics have a different, you know, thresholds, and we probably will have to modify some of our statutory pieces, not on, I think, on practice per se, because, you know, we obviously have to be, you know, we disclose in terms of attainment versus non-attainment areas, but just overall, it's going to be a very positive thing. It's always, you know, it's not perfect. I know there's a lot of criticism in terms of housing issues, and that will be probably where we're going to see the biggest problem is housing. I mean, just realistically, it's going to be a huge challenge for, we'll say, a couple of months, more than just the event itself, but the previous, you know, before and after. I think housing is where our biggest concern is from logistically speaking, but for infrastructure and for some of these climate-related conversations, it's only going to increase the visibility of us, putting us at a different level, because we're not going to want to, for sure, we're going to work real hard not to embarrass ourselves at the international level, please. So I like the idea that we will have those conversations, but I believe housing is probably where we're going to see the biggest concern to try to logistically make it happen.
Hi, I'm Libby Blanchard with the Wilkes Center as well. I wanted to follow up on that and ask about how Salt Lake is planning to make the Olympics climate positive and what institutions are working on that issue at the moment.
My understanding from where I know in terms of the Olympics, I don't know that they're there. So I think everybody understands kind of like the criteria of what's expected from the Olympics as an organization, but I don't know that they're that ahead. If you think about it, I think there's 2034, is that the date we're, so, you know, it moved from, because it was looking into 2030, and then they pushed because of all the movement on the pandemic, and so now it's 2034. So right now, because in order to invest, you almost have to have you want to be secure, and I think we are now at that place. So you're now going to start seeing those groups. In the meetings that I've been, that has been in, you know, related to some of that conversations are they don't foresee the climate conversation being a problem, even though I know some people they're gonna hurt their feelings at one point, but they'll get over it because this event is so big, right? We cannot not, right? I mean, this is something that Utah does well, and they did really well in 2001. So like they're not gonna 2002, so they're not gonna drop it. I'm just saying a lot of people are gonna probably say some stuff that are gonna be weird, but I think in that criteria we're gonna be okay. Like I said, I think housing is where we're probably gonna struggle more, and you're gonna see some policy pushback on just how we get there, because what we need to have in order to do that, it's pretty big, and I don't know that we can't even handle our own housing crisis, and I'm seeing all of you guys are probably going through some of that suffering. See, I see their heads. So I think housing is where we're going to see. The climate pieces, I think we're going to be okay. There, like I said, some people may just not like some of the wording that's going to come out, but everybody's going to be behind that because they really want the event.
Yeah, great. And I would just add to that you know, Salt Lake City and others aren't in it alone. There's a whole team that are supporting them. We've had initial conversations with the organizing committee about what could it look like, how could different agencies engage, and I think I think we will rise to the occasion, and I'm really excited about it.
I spent a lot of time this last week at Aspire up at Utah State, and again, I don't know anything about any specific conversations right now, but I know they're heavily invested in and focusing on the electrification of the roads and the public transit systems and all of those types of things. And I think what the Olympic Games dynamic brings is an influx of the capital for those infrastructure type projects that really, from a planning and brainstorming idea and all of that, you know, a lot of the technology is on the right track for that. And so being able to have that technology infused with the appropriate capital needed, I think as mentioned, I don't think it will be a huge issue.
Thank you for being here. My name is Gannett Heller. I'm from the Department of Atmospheric Sciences here at the U. And I wanted to start by complimenting what the legislature did for the Division of Air Quality in terms of salary increases this year. And I think that really helps retain talent. And I wanted to talk about, I'm excited to see the implementation and the messaging from DAQ about VOCs from small emitters that you've mentioned, like leaf blowers. But I am worried to a certain extent that that might take away from large polluters, large industrial polluters, and the legislation that's needed there. And I think we saw very clearly with MagCorp and the resulting House Bill 220 what a single individual pollution source can do to PM 2.5 in the valley. And I wondered if you'd comment if the legislators are thinking more about individual polluters based on House Bill 220.
Oh, that's a great question. So I'll just talk about my perspective, because some of the challenges that we get in conversing on this issue from like just data and science, right? Like, hey, you have these really larger polluters. And we get it a lot from some of our rural colleagues. It's like, well, that's Salt Lake Valley problem. And then you have Cache County, obviously, that also is not attainment, right? So, we have in the Air Quality Advisory Board. I'm laughing, it's not funny, but we have some legislators, and I'm including myself, and some of these conversations happen there because some of the members that are appointed there are rural area legislators, and they see it as their job to stop overreaching government policies because of poor Salt Lake City and their bad air quality. Now you're impacting the rest of the state. So I've had this dynamic with one of the specific legislators, and I talked to him especially on this, for example, the emission reduction plan on the smaller vehicles, right? Those smaller pieces that you mentioned. And I said, look, he said, well, rumor is out there that you want to have a statewide blanket approach. And I was like, I just want good public policy for the whole state. Mind you. He said, well, you're not taking, and I was trying to put myself on his position as the legislator in those rural areas where it's not an issue. It's like, why are you impacting everyone else? And so to answer to your question on individual, companies or polluters, or it gets into that dynamic of like, are you targeting one? And the answer is like, yes, because they clearly are a problem. So many, many years ago, when I was more naive and innocent, I decided to run a bill on, and I don't know if anyone here that was in the legislature during that time remembers this bill, it was a bill on the statute of limitation for polluters. Because we actually were the only statute of limitation of a year was those polluters, the air quality polluters, in the entire code. I was like, that's nonsense. Let's change that. Oh man, people really disliked me. There were a lot of people that were angry, obviously, people with a lot of influence that were very upset. And I'm like, well, it doesn't make sense. We have statute of limitation for everything else, but not on this one. Like a year, we don't even have enough investigators to rotate a year of the polluters that self-report, mind you. That's like, the layers of problems start piling up, right? So I was able to move it from 1 to 3. Again, this incremental steps. So to answer your question, I think part of it is how much we're doing on enforcement. And, here our director for the department and her limitations in terms of staffing, so you mentioned it first. So one, I would like to see more staffing on enforcement, so they are not on a, because you cannot even rotate within the time of the statute of limitation. It wouldn't even matter that you increase years when you're not able to do the whole process. And then I think we do have some laws that are there for a reason, but some of the enforcement pieces, if we need to bring more resources, I will start there. before jumping into individual polluters. I don't know that there will be enough appetite for that. But I think we have moved the needle on some of those pieces. I think the larger the polluters are, they're more, there's more visibility. But it will be a hard sell. I mean, I'm just being realistic, coming from the minority side. But I would like to, maybe it's time. And like I said, I did this many, many years ago, and I was able to move that. But it was one of the hardest bills I've ever passed. I mean, like people just. And somehow the reasoning behind it, they really felt it was okay to have a 1-year statute of limitation. I'm like, I know it doesn't work like that. But I mean, that's my perspective.
Well, I ditto, and I'm grateful that we have such strong advocates, people who see the bigger picture. So thank you so much for your support, because really this is a state issue. We're trying to protect all Utahns, and we need everyone rowing in that direction. I do just want to touch on a couple things that you mentioned. We are so grateful for the increases for our employees. We do need qualified experts administering these really complex programs that we have in the department, and we're grateful that we have another tool in our toolbox to keep folks at DEQ. Another thing you mentioned is some of the challenges around some of the emissions. And what we have seen through our inventory is that our industries are actually really well controlled. And I know it seems counterintuitive because they've got a point source and you can see something coming out of their stack. But our inventories have shown us that 8 tons per day during the summer of VOCs are coming from our lawn and garden equipment. That's not including our lawnmowers. This is just the handheld devices that we're using. 13% of our emissions are coming from our cars, our vehicles on the road, and 6% are coming from industry. So we're grateful for the partnership we've had with certain industries to reduce their emissions. There's clearly so much more work to be done across on the personal side as well, and the smaller sources, as well as our larger emitters. And one other thing I'll mention is that, in 15 years, our state has grown in population by 35%, yet our per capita emissions have been reduced by 40%. So we still have a lot of room to grow, but we're getting there, and it does take incremental change and steps, and we've just got to keep beating the drum, and I think we'll get there as a state.
And we're not talking about buildings. I mean, hello, that's the next
true.
thing. So I mean, we focus so much on vehicles, and we should. We did some pieces, not fully all buying that tier 3 yet until, because there were pieces I would have liked to see more aggressive, obviously enforcing, but buildings is the scary part. And Salt Lake City with the old buildings. So a lot of this has to do with construction rules. And, that's a tough group to crack, like seriously.
She cracks her knuckles.
Cracking my knuckles because I mean, we've tried so hard, and just making. I mean, we talked to, for example, the builders, right, and developers, and some of them already buy, their own best practices are putting some of these pieces, but I mean, that's not institutional, that's not standard, and getting to those standards, it's a legislative process, by the way, brutal. I mean, it's like bleeding, coming in, and you're like, I'm gonna bleed, it's gonna be bad. And the bruises are still hurting, and you come out and you're like, nope, we couldn't even move just like slightly one piece. So it's beyond even those, what we perceive as the large polluters, and some of them are, obviously polluting. It's our new buildings, is what do we do with the old buildings? Because retrofitting, new construction, I mean, that's expensive. It all comes back to that. So it's a lot of things that we sometimes take for granted. Like, I'm gonna build my own home, or I'm building this. Is those rules that we're not even touching, just because, and we have those meetings, and I encourage people to listen to those meetings, to attend those, because we need people that have the background to actually come and testify. Yeah. Well, what's heartbreaking? We have all these meetings, no public comment, and you're like, oh, no one cared about this. What just happened? And you're like in the battle, and it's like, it can get really tense and mean, but there's no one saying anything. And that makes it hard. So I guess my ask is, I would love to see more people engage in those conversations that are super boring, and those are 4-hour meetings on code, right, on construction code, and no one sits there and says how important it is to make sure that we require our builders to do this versus this other part.
All right, thank you so much.
I think there was one last question. from the
I think
gentleman.
we are all
Yeah,
out
you're
of
fine?
time,
Oh, perfect.
unfortunately, today for questions. But thank you so much for everyone in the audience for being here today, and please join me in thanking our guests.